We have basically all lost trust in institutions. What people tend to rank highest were CEOs, and in particular, my CEO. So we've worked into a world where people look to their CEO as a leader that they want to follow if that person's doing their job well, above and beyond politicians, clergymen, etc.
Welcome to Encouraging Leaders, a podcast that exists to remind CEOs and aspiring CEOs that you don't have to lead alone. I'm Mark DeBraun, and today we're joined by somebody who has breathed courage into me and to so many other leaders around the world, Steve Shifman. Steve is the chairman of Michelman, a world-class specialty chemicals manufacturer, and has served as their president and CEO from 2003 to 2021 before naming a new president. Steve was awarded the prestigious Ernst & Young Award in 2013 in manufacturing category, which is my passion too. So I can't wait to hear a little bit about that. And Steve's deeply committed to the community, where he gives time and energy and resources, as well as his leadership. Steve, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Mark. It's great to be with you.
So the first question that I ask on this podcast is, when did you realize, if you go back in your leadership journey, when did you realize that you didn't have to lead alone, that you didn't have to, or you couldn't accomplish everything by yourself?
Wow, that's such a good question. I guess a couple of things, Mark. First of all, I was very blessed to have parents who were actively engaged in the community. My dad was a CPA and had a small firm in the town where I was raised in Ohio. It's kind of a small regional firm. And along with having this wonderful business, he was actively involved in the community and sort of chaired everything. And my mom was very passionately involved in the arts. And so I learned from a young age that community service was very important, but on top of being very important, I watched how they were involved in the community, how they led, and it was never alone, right? They could have been chairing a committee, but it was always the committee. It was the people around them. And so I started watching them. I watched coaches when I played sports. I was a baseball player and football player as a kid, and watched coaches who were good versus those who weren't, and the ones who could sort of bring a group of guys together to behave and act like a team always got better results. I did a ton of theater also when I was in high school, and I ended up directing some theater, and I learned quickly that you could stomp around and you could yell and scream, or you could try to actually engage people to want to try and be part of your vision and have them sort of co-lead with you. And so, whether it was sports or watching my parents or theater from a young age, I sort of became a student of good versus not such great leadership.
And it's so great. You had a dad and mom who were actually demonstrating that. You got to see it in team sports. Those are such a great place to learn that this is not just about me. And then the theater. Several of my kids, 2 out of the 3, are deeply involved in theater. And you just watch that team, and there's no way they can do it alone. They're just all up there performing.
One of the things I also noticed as a kid, and then for sure as a young man when I entered the working world, was that popular media gets leadership all wrong. Whether it's in novels or in movies, it's always the fiery football coach who's smashing a clipboard over a player's head, or it's the yelling and screaming locker room scenes. And those make fabulous theater and they make fabulous movies, but in my experience, it doesn't make great real life leadership. You might inspire a team for 5 or 10 minutes at halftime, coming out of that huddle screaming, but you're not going to be able to create sustained performance by yelling and screaming. And so it was the leaders that were a little bit more quiet, a little bit more collaborative, the ones who would try to bring everybody along to their vision rather than yelling and screaming, were the ones that always caught my attention as a young person. And it's what I certainly tried to emulate as I got my chance to lead along the way.
Yeah, well, it seems interesting that media actually portrays it the opposite, right? That's what you're saying, is there's counter to that out there in the public view. This is the leader that they're showing because they're very up and down, and they show very high levels of emotional intensity, but it's not what drives it. And then I think about the other piece that I wonder, school seems like it's set up for individual accomplishment. I remember in engineering, they didn't give me anybody's grade except for my own, and I had to get all the answers right. And I had to be at the top of the class to be at the top of the class. I couldn't be second to get first.
Well, what do they used to call working together when we were in school? Cheating, right? But now we call it collaboration. And so, we know that most great work gets done in teams and gets done collaboratively, and encouraging people to figure out how to collaborate, I think, is a really important leadership characteristic.
Yeah, so I know that now. I did not actually know that coming out of school, because I did learn the other methods. I didn't get to see as many examples as you did. So I had to unlearn to learn again, which I find that I'm not alone in that. Like I have other CEOs that are part of that challenge that learned that they had to do it all alone. And so I'm so glad you learned it early. What did that look like in your leadership when you were president CEO? So you had that background of understanding that you needed to rally the team through collaboration. And how did that look? What were some of the rhythms that created?
Well, some of it also, Mark, was born out of the fact, and I don't mean to humble brag because I'm not a big fan of the humble brag, but I never thought I was that smart. I know that I'm smart and I know that I've got capabilities and skills, but I never thought I was smart enough. And so we were always better by having the best of everybody around us rather than just me assuming that my vision, my passion, my intelligence was going to carry us to victory. And so maybe it was born from insecurity. I don't know. But what my leadership really looked like was it takes a while, right? Because when you're a young leader, you're trying to figure it out and you're trying to find out who you're going to model, who you're going to emulate, what kind of leader do you want to be. And so it's hard to find your voice, or at least it was hard for me. But once I found my voice, I was confident enough. I think I gained enough confidence to be able to lay out what I thought my vision was, really where I wanted to go, but then enlist people to join me in that and then also challenge that vision, right? If there were a few times when I was absolutely certain and I would say, you know what, I really don't need input because this is where we're going, but that was rare. I'd say far more often, guys, this is where I'm thinking we want to head. This is why I think we want to head here. But let's pressure test this. Let's challenge it. Let's try to make sure we're getting everybody's sort of most important viewpoints, and then we'll make a collective decision as we would move forward. So, not in everything. Sometimes when you're going to decide where you're going to have lunch, you don't need a committee, right? But for the big decisions, making sure that the smartest voices around me were brought into the conversation was always really important to me when I was leading. I really love if you unpack that, right? I've got a fairly clear point of view about what we should be doing, but I'm willing to be talked out of it if better evidence is presented to me, right? Isn't it unfortunate that we live at a time, unfortunately in the political environment, but it's gone everywhere else, that if you change your mind, you're called a flip-flopper or you're weak, right? To me, changing one's mind based upon the introduction of better information is the mark of a smart leader. That's wisdom.
Right.
That's right. But we've characterized it as being a weakness to change one's mind. And I think that's just a travesty.
Yeah. Well, we don't spend a ton of time on politics here on the podcast because we could definitely divert a lot. But I think about how when you're leading in an organization, actually, let's just mention that. So, how did you not let political divides inside of the world? Because you're leading a large organization and there are people on both sides of that, any position. How did you not let that divide you as an organization?
It's really, really hard, I think, today, because it's interesting. I recall 4 or 5 years ago in one of the Edelman Trust surveys, they were talking about how we have basically all lost trust in institutions, whether it's organized religion or government or scouting or what have you. And what people tend to rank highest, shockingly, I mean, it's a plurality, not a majority, but what were ranked highest were CEOs, and in particular, my CEO, right? So we've worked into a world where people look to their CEO as a leader that they want to follow if that person's doing their job well, above and beyond politicians, clergymen, et cetera. And so it makes it tenuous and challenging then when these hot political issues are in the zeitgeist, right? So here's how I tried really hard to deal with it. I'm sure I wasn't 100% successful. In today's day and age, all you got to do is Google somebody's name and you can find out to whom they give politically. And we built our business in Cincinnati, Ohio. It's either the biggest small town in America or the smallest big town in America. And it's really easy to know everybody's business. And I had a fairly big profile. And so my politics were well known, full stop, because it's just easy to see who I would donate to. But I would try very hard not to bring that into the business. Rather, we would lead with values. We still are very clear in our company about the values that define who we are and how we behave. We try to make almost all of our decisions around those values. And so if we spend a lot of time, as we did, talking about values and ingraining those values into decision making and into sort of our vision and purpose for the business, then when these hot political issues came up, it would be very easy for me to draw a line between our values and those behaviors. And so I could kind of keep politics out, but unfortunately, it's such a big sort of goulash right now that everything has become political. That
I think about all the CEOs that are listening and the ones that I get the pleasure of working with, and values becomes a pin, like a placeholder that they can actually keep coming back to. And when they have them well defined, articulated, and built into everything, hiring, training, all promotion, all the stuff, so that everybody knows that this is how we operate, it builds an enormous strength in the culture that is bigger than politics. It's better than and stronger than. The political world, all those other institutions, they don't have a common set of values. They don't have something that they can keep on coming back to. They've got other things than values that they keep going back to, positions or decisions or.
well, in the case of a company like ours, like yours, like companies for the people who are listening to this conversation, if if people have done and continue to do the work over a long period of time to reinforce those values, to make decisions publicly based upon those values, then when these difficult things arise, you've already got the groundwork laid for making this decision.
You mentioned CEOs having the trust of their people relative to other institutions and other leaders. I believe it's because of that. If the CEO will act aligned with the values that they've stated, they become trustworthy because I can see you're going to act consistent with the values you've stated. And if leaders are not acting in concert with the values that they've stated, it loses trust.
I have a son who's a comedian, and they love callbacks, and so we're going to do a callback to an early part of the conversation and talking about humility and allowing others to be part of a process. This is working when we're all humans and we make mistakes, right? This is working when one of your associates, and hopefully 2 or 3 rungs down in the organization, pulls you aside and said, that thing that you just talked about or just did, that doesn't seem to be consistent with the values that we talk so much about. And sometimes they're right, and to be able to say, man, you got me, thank you, right? And then change course because somebody recognizes that you've deviated from a value because maybe we had a blind spot or we just missed something along the way.
So one of my favorite things, I got to lead at president level for 13 years, and a welder came up and said, the variable comp that you've put in place, we had instituted variable comp across the organization, but it was tiered, and the percentages were different based on the different tiers of employees. And he came up and he said, Mark, I really appreciate the values that you shared, and this is not aligned with it. And I said, thank you for the feedback. I can't change it right now, but thank you for the feedback. And I will take that in with us as we think about next year. And we took it into the conversation. We robustly discussed, is it aligned with our values? Is it not? How do we do this well? How do we do it as well as we can? What can we afford to do? What can we do? And we made a decision based on his pressure test of the values to shift the whole comp plan in the whole organization because he had the courage to call us out on something that we were doing that was not aligned with values. It was so beautiful. I was like, wow, that is what I want. And I think about, Michelman is known culturally as a world-class organization. The reason you got the award is because people inside the organization were thriving and engaged. So I think about just engagement. One of the things that we try to do is help CEOs get a higher level of engagement in the vision, in both purpose and profit, growing the business. Talk to me about engagement at Michelman, and how did you get more engagement? What would you say is critical for CEOs to know to get employees engaged?
Yeah, it's like Quicksilver, isn't it? I mean, we're all striving to keep our associates engaged, and if you look at the data, sadly, most people go to work every day unengaged with their work.
32% is the average engagement of U.S. workers. $1.9 trillion it's costing the U.S. But the companies that are having those level of engagements, it's just detrimental to their profit and purpose.
Yeah, and so it's really hard. First, we should recognize that. What we try to do, and never perfect, is recognize that people aren't monoliths who come to work for your company. People are human beings and they bring their own stuff. And we try very hard to meet people where they are. Look, I spent a lot of time as the CEO wandering around. I remember a conversation with my kids when they were little, and they'd say, Daddy, do you make the chemicals? No, I don't make the chemicals. Do you invent the chemicals? No, I don't make the chemicals. Do you go out and sell the chemicals? Not that much. What do you do? And I said, well, I wander around a lot, right? I wander around and I fly around in airplanes, right? And spend a lot of time with our own people, talking about what matters to us, the purpose of our company, why we're different, problems we're trying to solve, why it's important that we exist, why the world's better because our company is in it, and why working in our communities is important, and really tried to know who they were and something about their family, and make sure that they felt that the work that they were doing really mattered, whether you were in accounts receivable or you were a third shift maintenance worker or you were the chief financial officer of the company. I mean, everybody's got an important role to play. And so we would try to spend an awful lot of time just at retail, one-on-one, small groups. I would do skip level breakfast or lunches, probably 3 or 4 a month, just sit and talk to people, never an agenda, just talking about the business. Um, Multimedia was very important to me. So I had a podcast, an internal podcast that I did. I started writing letters to our associates during the financial crisis of 2008 when the world went sideways and we were doing well. And it was the first time in my professional life where almost everybody I knew had somebody close to them that was being negatively impacted. Historically, it had been somebody else. In this case, it was maybe my dad or your brother, or somebody had somebody that was being impacted negatively, and we were doing fine. So I wrote a letter home, an old-fashioned letter, not email, because I wanted to sit on their kitchen table, because I wanted the families to read it, just basically with a little message from me and an update on how the business was doing. And then I did it the next month, and I did it the next month. And before long, I'd painted myself into a corner. And I did that for 15 years every month. And it was a 2 or 3 page letter. And I started running out of ideas. And so I remember one month I did a whole company update in a series of haikus, right? And it was just stupid. And I asked people to respond to me in haiku, and I got tons of haikus back on my desk. But I did that. We did webinars monthly. We'll pick whatever. The point is, you can do it in any style you want. I realized that although we have brilliant scientists working in our business, most people aren't doing rocket science every day. They just want to know that their work matters. They want to know that we matter, and they want to know that you matter to me, right? And so it was just a lot of attention being paid to the human beings who got it every day. And I would say to them regularly that they're all free agents, right? Everybody who worked for us was smart and capable of probably going someplace else and making more money tomorrow, just because that's the way the world works. But they were choosing every day to come and work for us. And I wanted them to know how grateful we were and why it was so important that they came to work for us.
Really powerful there. The CEOs that are listening, if you're overwhelmed by the list that you just heard for habits that could be developed, just know that they start one at a time. You create one habit at a time. I remember the first habit was I'm going to walk around the plant, and I'm just going to do the walk, and I'm going to talk to as many people as I can in half an hour. And I'm just going to ask them, how are you at home? How are you here? And is there anything I should change about my leadership that you would recommend I adjust or improve? And I just listened. And if I made it through 3 people or made it through 10, I had that half an hour and I was just developing the habit. And that's the only one I did. I didn't write all the people letters yet, but it strengthened my understanding of who they were. And I helped them understand that they matter, that we matter, and they matter to us. A lot of times, young CEOs, young presidents stepping into the role for the first time. And you stepped into the president role, which had all the functions into it in 2003 for the first time. Is that correct?
Yeah.
When you go back there, you think about yourself in 2003, what would have 20 plus years past that? What would you tell yourself? What piece of advice would you give yourself back then that you didn't know then?
Oh man, we don't have enough time, Mark. We got to open a bottle of wine and settle in. We could have a long conversation with full humility. So Michelman is a family business. We are celebrating our 75th anniversary this year, and I represent third generation, but I came into this business the old-fashioned way. I married into the family, not the business. So I married into the family and joined the business 8 years later. Some people marry into the business. I had no interest in the business. Life changes, and here I found myself. Michelman did not need me to be successful. It had been a very successful business well before I stepped into the role of CEO. And at the same time, I realized how much potential could be unlocked in this business. We became, over my tenure, a much more global business, and we grew with our science and capabilities and, I think, impact. I raise that now because I tried too hard early, I think, to basically ignore the fact that we were family. And I was focusing on just professionalizing the business. I never would deny that we were a family business, by the way, but it just wasn't that important to me. I came to realize, though, over a long period of time, that these were not mutually exclusive. One can have a very powerful family or private business and still be incredibly professional. And in fact, the fact that we are family, the fact that we are generational or evergreen, the fact that our values are what lead us, the fact that we're planning for the next 75 years is why people want to come work for us and why businesses want to do business with us, because we're also a highly professional and very capable business, right? And so we had people who would leave GE or Exxon or Procter & Gamble to come join Michelman. We pay them quite well, and they had quite a great career, and they knew that they'd be valued as human beings. They knew that they were part of something bigger. They knew they were part of hopefully a generational story, right? So it took me a while to grow up, let my ego get out of the way, because I was the son-in-law and I was going to prove that I deserved the job, and so I had to get past all that and then grow up and realize that I didn't have to prove to anybody that I was the leader. I had the job. All I had to do was just do the job, right? Rather than try to convince people that it was mine, that I didn't get it because I was the son-in-law. It was crazy. Of course I got the job because I was the son-in-law. It didn't make me not capable. And so I had to get past all of that. And then also, I had great coaches along the way, which I know you have as well. That's one of the reasons why I love to coach now, is because I was blessed to have great coaches. And I would say to one of my coaches, but I'm not a typical CEO. Finally, he said to me, shut up. He says, what is a typical CEO? And I said, well, I didn't get trained at Exxon. I didn't get through this. He said, so stop, right? He helped me to get out of my own way and recognize that, again, as CEOs, we're all ends of one. There is not a typical CEO. I'll stop. I promise I'll stop. One of my colleagues would like to say sometimes if we try too hard to be, let's say, like Dow, so we can't out Dow. Dow's Dow, right? We can't out Dow them. I can't out Jamie Dimon, or I can't out John Pepper. I just got to do the best job I can do given the business I'm trying to lead with the capabilities and beliefs that I bring into the role.
You summed it up beautifully right now. I just love it. Be your authentic self, allow yourself to be able to step into the role, accept responsibility, full responsibility for the role. There's nobody else in the role. You're in the role, and celebrate that and be yourself and go out and lead. I think it's so many of our CEOs that we work with are family owned businesses. I have fallen in love with that model. You mentioned deep values, long-term focus, the idea that you don't make excuses for non-professional behavior, but you actually can have both. It's not mutually exclusive. And so if you're listening today and want to understand, if you're a young president, CEO, and want to understand how do you get everybody engaged, moving forward, growing in both purpose and profit, would love to meet you and just have a conversation, learn what your business is like, learn who you are as a CEO, and see how we can encourage you. You can find my contact information or all of our coaches at encouragingleaders.com. Happy to spend time with you. And thank you for listening. And Steve, thank you so much for joining us.
It's been a pleasure to be with you. Thank you, Mark.